Denelda Charon was a wee wisp of a thing when at the age of 9 she went to work in the mica factory. She worked hour after hour, her frozen fingers separating those delicate sheets of mica. In the wintertime, the water beside her had a skin of ice on it. In the summertime, that was so hot. The girls fainted, and when they fainted, they lost pay for the time missed. Their pay, only pennies a day. Denelda Charon dreamed of being an allumetière. If she could make matches for Ebi Eddie Match, why, she'd stink of sulfur, but she would have a pay packet to take home. They would be able to pay rent and buy food. She knew that the Ebi Eddie Match would pay a woman a full quarter of a man's salary. And the working conditions were perfect. Why, it wasn't that in the winter there were wood stoves in every corner. I mean, there was so much sawdust, chemical in the air. One spark from a wood fire would have ignited the whole thing. The wood fire was in the room next door, but it boiled water, and there were pipes that took that water through the whole factory. Even the corners were warmer than the houses at home. And in the summer, to keep the chemicals stable, the men brought in huge blocks of river ice. They put them under the floorboards, and the girls and the chemicals stayed cool. Many a family sent their daughter off to the respectable matchworks to work until they were married. But to work for Ebi Eddie Match, one had to be large enough to do the tasks. She wasn't. So she went to the mica factory. Every day after working, she would go home, make supper, supervise the siblings as they washed up, and then she would teach them their prayers, put them to bed with a story, Loup-garou or Dijon, or what their mother would have done and said if she was still alive. It was a long, hard day, but at the end, she could just fall asleep. Sundays, of course, they were half days off. She would line the siblings up, march them down to the church behind Papa. And so the time passed. Everything in routine. Her siblings grew. So did she. And one day, she stopped in at the market at the end of shift. She needed some vegetables. She stood behind a woman who smelled of sulfur. This woman was much older. She was probably 20. She would be a contre-maîtresse, one of the supervisors at Ebi Eddie Match, one of those women who would hire match girls. She waited, and when that woman turned and walked down the road, she fell into step with her. Without an introduction, she started to explain that she had nimble fingers trained at the mica works. She had strong arms built up over years at the washboard. She would never let a match scrape across a workbench. And the woman stopped, stared up and down at the girl. Denelda put her head respectfully down, tried not to think of her neighbor. The Denis girl had been tired at the end of shift. She'd let one match scrape. Of course it ignited, and then hundreds, and then her dress. Denelda could smell the scorched hair, the seared skin. She took a deep breath, and the contre-maîtresse said something, bringing her back to the road. "You'll do. Match store, 7 a.m. The girl, the woman, left, and Denelda stared after her. But the next day after work, Denelda was coming home and the boys were taunting, "You stink." Denelda whipped the shawl off her shoulders and tried to stuff it into their noses, chased after them so that they would know what a match girl smelled like. On Sunday at church, she walked in and sat at her pew. Everyone by now would know she was an allumetière. The sermon was a familiar one, the oblate priest talking again about justice, equality. He explained that those who lived in poverty had no idea what those people who had the means to create wealth, what they needed. And the owners of the businesses, the factories, did not understand their working people. What was required, said the priest, was a mediator. Who better than the Catholic priest who was chaplain for the Catholic Workers' Union? They could communicate between the two groups. With understanding would come working conditions improved, safer working conditions, living wages. It would be salvation of the population by Catholic union. He went on to explain that les allumetières were incredibly important because they had just had 300 match girls, a total of 300, join the Catholic Women's Union. Denelda sat just a little higher in her pew. She was a match girl. That Monday at work, the contre-maîtresse was moving up and down the works, monitoring quality, quantity. 150 girls had to produce 70 million matches a day. And then she stopped behind Denelda. She paused and said, "At end of shift, stay behind." Denelda's knees went to water. She made sure her hands were steady, and she tried to think. She was doing exactly what she had been taught. She was keeping up with the girls on both sides. At end of shift, when everyone else had cleared all their bench, she made sure hers was immaculate. She stood, respectful, and she could hear the swish of skirts as the contre-maîtresse approached. The woman spoke. 25 cents is a lot of money. And 25 cents can do so much good. Why, for only 25 cents a month, Denelda could become a member of the Catholic Women's Union. Denelda's head was going up and down. But the woman paid no attention. She went on with her speech. For only 25 cents a month, she would have the protection of a union. She would be able to go to the courses at the Catholic Union Hall. Those courses would teach a young girl all she needed to know: sewing, cooking, household finances, household management. Why, you could even take reading and writing. Denelda's body was bouncing up and down. Of course she would become a match girl. Of course she would become a member of the Catholic Women's Union. She would have a job for sure. And the priest would be quite pleased. In the next months, Denelda learned every aspect of the matchworks. And by the end of the year, she was one of the ones teaching the new girls how to hold the slivers of wood, how to dip them into the chemical baths, into the 2 baths of self-igniting wax, how to put them in the sand to dry, to gather them back up, and without rubbing one against the other, how to place them into the boxes. After 2 years, it was Denelda saying, 25 cents is a goodly sum of money, but 25 cents can do so much good. It was one of the new girls who came to her saying, "I can't go to the Catholic Union Hall. My father says I can't walk the streets of Hull by myself." "Well," said Denelda, "we'll all go together. I'll speak with your mother on Sunday at church." And so it was. Small groups left Edie Match, went to the Catholic Church for daily Mass, and then on to the Catholic Union Hall. That's where they met for classes, to talk. And that's where they would gather when one of them was going to leave the Matchworks to get married. Girls came to Denelda. She knew when to listen. She knew when they needed advice and were willing to take it. And occasionally she recognized information needed to be passed on. She earned her position as contre-maîtresse. She took on the responsibility to hire and monitor, and occasionally fire, young match girls. But more important was her responsibility to safeguard her girls, mostly against any of the male employees who might threaten their morals or, worse yet, their virtue. As contre-maîtresse, she had many roles. And the girls, they came over and over. In 1918, it was suggested by several people that she should consider becoming the president of the Women's Catholic Union. Of course, the priest explained, she would never be asked to speak directly with accompanying men. That would be crass. No, the responsibility of negotiations would be the chaplain of the union, the priest bonhomme, or the president of the men's union. The women's union president was responsible for those courses, the education of the young girls, household arts, and moral education. She was also responsible for the safe, not only the physical safety, but the moral safety of her girls. Denelda became president of the Women's Catholic Union. And in 1919, she learned a little more of the politics behind that role. In October of that year, the economy was doing well. There were many people demanding matches, new back from Warfront. And the company decided they needed a second shift. The chaplain of the Catholic Union explained, no Catholic girl should be out after dark. 8 p.m. is too late for a second shift to end. No. The company began to negotiate in earnest. And after 3 long months, the president of the men's union had won a few concessions for the girls. First and most important, the union, in this formal agreement, this contract, the union was recognized as the negotiating party. And the contre-maîtresse role was recognized as the female supervisor on the floor, with power to hire and fire match girls. 4 days a year holiday would be given to every match girl, and their salary would be increased by 50%. That meant a match girl would earn a full third of a man's salary. The match girls celebrated. And they didn't even mind, maybe they never had, that the concession the union had to give was there would be a second shift for 3 months. Time was so exciting. Things were changing, technologies growing. EBRI Match had always been at the forefront of technology. In 1885, it was EBRI Match that had been the first company to power its machines with hydroelectric power. And it was EBRI himself who worked to convince the municipal government they should be putting in electric street lamps. And then came electric streetcars. By the 1920s, there were electricity products, electricity lighting, stoves in people's homes. And by 1924, even the middle class were looking at those newfangled electric stoves. And that meant the marketplace was changing. Fewer wood stoves, fewer gas lanterns, fewer candles. fewer matches. And as the demand for matches decreased, the new owners of EBA Match began to look for ways to maintain profit. Couldn't increase the cost of the matches, couldn't increase the sale of matches, had to decrease the cost of making those matches. The new owners, Harry Sheriff and R.B. Bennett, had inherited the company. R.B. Bennett, the future Prime Minister, had several business interests in Hull. One more was a good thing. He recognized right away that the union was the biggest cost at EBA Match. And long term, if you eliminate the contre-maîtresse, then the most militant of the match girls would be gone, and hiring and firing could be done by the men. They could hire Protestant girls. Fewer numbers in the union, less power, but that was long term. Short term, that would just decrease the salary of the match girls. And so, Sheriff and R.B. Bennett told their supervisor, Arthur Wood, to post notices saying that as of the next pay period, the girls would receive a lower salary. When the girls read the notice, they were scared. How could their parents pay rent and buy food without every single penny from their paycheck? What could they do? Donalda walked over to the wall. She ripped down the notice and read it so that those who couldn't read would know what was being discussed. The noise in the room increased. The agitation was palpable. They turned to Donalda. What would they do? She said, "We are a union, and in our solidarity we have strength. We must decide together what we will do. We are a union with a legal contract that is being dishonored. Will you stand for that?" There was a shaking of heads. There was a murmuring of no. Donalda strode down the center of the factory and out the front door, and every girl followed her. Arthur Wood came down from his office, down the stairs and across the floor, and ranted at them, "Get back to your workbench!" Donalda ignored him, and every girl, once outside, tried to make her way to exactly behind Donalda Charon, because they weren't quite certain what to do. It was as if, to Donalda Charon, Arthur Wood had no authority. He ranted, and she beckoned a young boy to come and asked him to go to the Catholic Union Hall and tell the men there that their workers had walked out. And then go past the priest's house and tell Père Bonhomme he should probably come too. When the two men finally arrived, she showed them the notice and explained the girls were not going back into that factory until they were assured the 1919 contract stood, and Arthur Wood himself had ripped down every one of those notices. The priest and the president of the men's union went to speak with Mr. Wood. Mr. Wood spoke rather loudly. And then he turned and stormed into the room. He was gone a long time. And when he came back, he stared at the sky and said, "There has been a miscommunication. All is as it was. Everyone can return to exactly what was." And he looked at the men. The priest and the president looked at Donalda, and she pointed to the notice. The men said something to Mr. Wood, who turned on his heel, stormed inside, pulled down notices, crumpled them to the floor, and then stormed back upstairs to his office. Denilda walked back in calmly. The girls followed, and they worked hard to meet quota that day. 4 days later, Denilda got to work, early as usual, to find the door bolted. There was a notice posted, and that notice said, "The Matchworks was closed for machinery repair and would remain closed until the surplus of matches had been depleted." As the girls arrived, they realized this was not a decrease in salary by half. This was no salary for goodness knows how long, and would they get their job back? They turned again to Denilda. "What do we do?" And she told them, "Today, you go home. You wash your very best dress and your white gloves. And then, tomorrow, you come back here, dressed in your finest, and we will walk a picket line like the men do. The people of Hull will know we are their daughters, their sisters, that we are good Catholic girls with a legal contract that is being dishonored." The men of E.B. Eddy Match will have to address this. Slowly, the girls left. Well, most of them. There were several who stayed and walked with Denilda to the Catholic Union Hall. There, they talked, planned, made signs. And then Denilda went down and talked with the men in the men's union. She talked with the priests. And she walked down the corridor to the local newspaper, which just happened to be in the same hall as the Catholic Union. She spoke with the men of the Dois. The next morning, the girls arrived in their Sunday best. They picked up the signs and they walked 2 by 2. Out on the streets of Hull, young boys were holding up newspapers calling, "Read all about it! Big business betrays match girls!" And people came from all over Hull to see what was happening. The boys came to taunt the girls, but when they saw 3 local priests standing in solidarity with the match girls, the boys disappeared into the crowd. For 2 weeks, the girls walked their full shift, all 150 of them. And there was not a word from E.B. Eddy Match. But the business people and the people of Hull brought food to the picket line, water. They supported their girls, most of them fresh into their teens. There was a buzz and a camaraderie. 17 days after they had been locked out, some of the girls began to get letters. And they brought those letters, waving them in their air, calling to Denilda, "You want to see what that Arthur Wood and the Match Company has done now?" They were offered their job back if they denounced the union and accepted the pay decrease. And they weren't doing it. Denilda and Pergamon took those letters down to Le Doigt. And after the next day's newspaper, a representative from E.B. Eddy Match contacted the union. They gave a clear set of terms. The salary, of course, would be decreased. The union disbanded, and the role of contre-maîtresse would be eliminated in favor of Arthur Wood and his men working as supervisors on the factory floor. The people of Hull were astounded. A priest did a whole sermon on this He said that if the young men were supervising the factory floor, they would have to control the quality of matches made, the quantity of matches made, and their own reactions to the girls around them. That kind of control, the priest said, was impossible. Negotiations continued. Denelle Ducharme, of course, never spoke directly to the EB80 matchmen, but she was part of every planning session. She was there at every debriefing. She helped plan the overall strategy. She helped craft the words of every new proposal. And she talked. She talked to the people. She talked to the people in the church, in the parish hall. She talked to the people in the businesses, in the shops, on the streets, in the market. She told them, the match girls want their 1919 contract. No increase. Just what was legally theirs. And the people of Hull were with them. Shopkeepers told Denelda that people would come in and say, we want matches, but not those EB80 kind. And when the girls realized that they could not survive on their meager strike pay, those energetic young girls thought, we'll do a fundraiser. People in Hull were behind them. They offered venues, materials, labor, and purchasing power. There were 9 fundraisers over the length of that lockout strike. Every one of them a success, and not one of the girls had to leave the picket line because she needed money. There were one thing after another that gave them confidence. And then on October 20th, Arthur Wood came in his open-air touring car on his way into EB80 match, told his chauffeur to stop in front of the picket line, stood in the back seat and began to hurl insults. The girls ignored him, and he was so furious that he told his driver, roll through the lot of them and aim at that one. Denelle Ducharme. The driver turned the wheel, gunned the engine, and a passerby, horrified about the possibilities, leapt forward on the running board as the car was shooting forward, grabbed the steering wheel and yanked it right, missing everyone. The police were called. Arthur Wood was escorted from the premises for his own safety. Charges were not laid. But news of this event traveled as far as Quebec City, and the provincial government that very night appointed a mediator, investigator, to look into this labor dispute thing that was happening way over in Hull. EB80 Match refused to participate in any investigation. People of Hull boycotted not only EB80 matches, but all the EB80 products, washboards, basins, brooms, paper products. The municipality sent a mediator to participate in the negotiations. EB80 Match refused to negotiate. The boycott spread from Hull to Hawkesbury to Montreal, across the river to Ottawa to Toronto. Harry Sheriff and R.B. Bennett were forced by economics and political public opinion to negotiate, to make concessions. On November 20th, a contract was put on the table to be signed. It was basically the 1919 agreement. The union was recognized as negotiating body. The wages were 1919 wages. The role of contre-maîtresse was recognized as floor supervisor, but she would lose her right to hire and fire in favor of Arthur Wood and his men. Still, every one of the match girls would get her job back. Everyone save one. R.B. Bennett had brought with him to the negotiating table his own priest, who replaced the union priest. And so Père Carrier abandoned Denise Charon. She alone would not return. But she knew this was the best agreement she could get for her girls. And as president of the Catholic Women's Union, Denise Charon signed that contract. The people of Hull celebrated. Their young match girls had fought for justice and won their jobs back. They celebrated the name of Denise Charon. They celebrated les Allumetières. And the people of Hull named a street Boulevard des Allumetières.